sin really is destructive, and it's selfishness, and it's dark, and it's ugly, and it doesn't make for a good life. And our young people know that when they live in these broken situations. They're not just broken, but sinful and selfish choices have made their lives living hells. So you can say, like, oh, divorce is a sin, um, but I'm forgiven. So now I'm going to put all this behind me. Now, usually putting all this behind me means I found another girl.
Yep.
But actually, I found the other girl while I was still married to the other one, if the truth were told. But I'm putting this behind me, which means I'm just putting the responsibility behind me. Now, who that doesn't work for is the guy or the girl who's been left behind. Who it doesn't work for are your kids, who on Thursday don't know which house they're going to stay at. Am I staying at mom's house or dad's house? And then people say, well, kids are resilient. No, they're not. They're going to be messed up because of what you did. So sin is a very ugly thing. I always say, like, go to a Walmart. Now you'll see, when you see something that's good and right, it's beautiful. When you see a mom say to the kid, hey, can you reach that jar of peanut butter for me? And the kid does it. Here, mom, I got it for you. There's something really sweet about that. But when you see the mother mouthing off at the kid, using foul language, when you see the kid disregarding his mother and acting in a kind of put off way, it's ugly. Like, this is your mom.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, when you talk about the fourth commandment, honoring your father and mother, you got to describe what it is we're talking about, because these aren't rule infractions. These are the kinds of things that make life ugly, and they make life miserable, and they cause damage.
So maybe this is an example. I think we might have talked about this before, but and this might kind of tie in too to like the failure of the church when they speak about sin, and kind of this might be full antinomianism. I don't know. This was the ELCA, right? So this is a church at one of my churches. There was a family that joined, and one of the things that had happened and why they left the ELCA was their son was married, and they went to an ELCA church, and the wife decided that she wanted a divorce. They had 2 kids, and she wanted a divorce, and she wanted to marry another woman who was also married and had a couple kids. And so those 2 women get married. The ELCA church blesses it, right? And I don't know what the inner conversation, but I'm sure it went something like, well, you're forgiven because Christ died for you. So to your point, you can put that aside. And, what is the church doing when they do that? They're, to your point, they push these kids away. And now what are the kids going to think of with the church? Like, now my family is completely destroyed, and the church supported that. So they're supporting something ugly. So where they're thinking they're being like kind and supportive, they're actually promoting a poison that is permeating all these different lives.
It's a different world we're living in. And talking about being in the public school, I had a friend who, it's an amazing thing. He was the only kid whose parents were divorced in the whole class. So maybe 30 kids, he was the only one, which is crazy now to think about. But even in that situation, his parents simply lived separately from one another. Neither one went off with another, found another spouse. They just couldn't get along.
Mm-hmm.
So they got divorced, but they still cared about their kid. And when you look at the situation, kids are always going to be the collateral damage. That's what with abortion, the kid gets in the way of my choice, my plans, what I want to do. And divorce is a very adult sin, adultery, but it takes no consideration for others.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very selfish move. And I don't know where in the church is a place for simple penitence, because having done something, how will allow my life in any way reflect that what I've done? See, forgiveness is true, and it comes all the way. So a woman's had an abortion. She should know that Christ has died for her. She need not live with the guilt that will condemn her. Christ has paid for that sin. On the other hand, there needs to be a deep recognition that the results of that sin remain. The child's not coming back to life. The pain is not going to go away. So, yeah, divorce is forgiven. However, the children are still going to pay for it. So, in that sense, we ought to be a bit more sober minded. Now, it's because of when you look at the situation we're in with the transgender and all that, there is a certain sense in which it's a situation where those who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. So long before you had the transgender thing and gay marriage, you had no fault divorce. So these things all happened together in the early 70s as kind of the culmination of a it had been a long time coming. But in the early 70s, you got no fault divorce, you got Roe v. Wade and abortion, and you got homosexuality being normalized. It was no longer considered even a psychiatric kind of deviation, something that was off, and it was completely a political move. And now we're suffering. So yeah, it's hard for people to say gay marriage is not only wrong, it's not a thing. It's not a thing. It's not like it's a wrong kind of marriage. It's not a marriage. It's fabricated. But it's harder to say that when you yourself are either divorced or your brother is, or it's in your family. It's kind of like, let's just agree not to talk about certain subjects.
So is it something like we've turned, or we can fall into this trap, which is kind of what you're speaking against, and kind of this movement's kind of pushing back against, that we might be failing in this area where we almost turn forgiveness into a hall pass.
Yeah.
Right. Is that kind of some of the issue? And when we do that, we're not actually treating the issue or really offering a proper path towards real reconciliation.
Yeah. And yeah, it becomes a hall pass. And I like that because not all rules, there are certain rules, like if you've gone through high school, there were so many rules that I thought were, as they might say in a movie I used to watch, bogus, because it's like it is frustrating. Like I remember in high school, like, well, can I go to the bathroom? No, the question is, may I go to the bathroom? But the very thought that you have to ask the teacher in order to go to the bathroom, and I'll be in trouble if I do. What if the teacher's out? You broke the rule. Well, is that really sin? But it gives people the idea that sin is really less consequential than it is.
Mm-hmm.
There's and you want to see, you who think of sin but lightly, ask yourself, why is it that Jesus had to die on the cross?
Mm-hmm.
If he had to die, why couldn't he just, and this is part of what we talked about, antinomianism. With antinomianism, which is a downplaying of the cross, you also have typically an undermining of the atonement. Because if the law really is something that has to be obeyed because breaking it does terrible things, then you see why there is no forgiveness without the shedding of the blood.
Mm-hmm.
And in Lutheran kind of circles, the patron saint of antinomianism is Gerhard Forde. He was not an LCMS pastor or professor. He became part of what was the ELCA, but he's much beloved in the LCMS. But he says things like this. He says the idea that Christ would have to die in order that God would be forgiving, that's ridiculous. He says if that's true, and Jesus is the Son of God, maybe he could just have been hurt. And wouldn't that be enough payment for our sin? And it really is blasphemous. I can't believe that when he says such things, that he maintains his kind of popularity. But when you look at Forde and Paulson.
So who's Paulson?
Oh, Stephen Paulson is his student. And he carries on the tradition of Gerhard Forde, who passed away, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago, I guess. But Paulson is his student, and he's also sadly popular in LCMS circles.
Why do you think that is for both of them?
It could be personal ties, friendships that he might have. It also is his message is appealing to a certain element of the LCMS. And this is the element, I think, that kind of wants to keep the Lutheranism, but doesn't know how to navigate this pagan culture. So, what do you do in a world in which everybody now believes that gay marriage is a thing? Well, you don't want to say that gay marriage is good, but then you don't want to talk about it either.
Mm,
So, what if we could just not really talk about it? And I've heard people talk like this. See, it's been a long time coming. Um, this was very common back in the day, even among conservatives, preachers, they wouldn't talk about abortion because it's too touchy. They're going to make people feel uncomfortable. They'll say, well, it's a political topic, or they'll say, well, we all have sin. I mean,
mm,
so our Lord says, if you look at somebody with anger, then you're liable to the sin of murder. Now, that's meant to say we're all guilty, so don't pretend to think that you're good. But it's used in the reverse way. Well, if I'm guilty of murder because of anger, you might as well just commit murder, right? Well, no, you don't want to do that because then the guy will be dead. So I'd rather have you angry with me, and then maybe we could we could forgive one another later.
mhm.
But if you kill me or I kill you, there's no chance there we can say, hey, I'm sorry about that. And but so we had pastors who would never speak about abortion, even though again, we're at the point in America, 60 million kids, and it keeps going. The Holocaust. If the pastor's not going to speak about that, who is going to speak up for those kids?